Have you ever had the feeling that when you reach your 40s, something inside you begins to change? As if a new phase is about to begin. Not out there, but in here, in your inner world? For many, this age marks the beginning of a crisis. For others, a new beginning. But for Carl Jung, one of the greatest names in psychology of the 20th century, 40 does not represent the end of youth, but the true beginning of life. If you believe that the best of your story has passed, you may be looking in the wrong direction. Jung saw the age of 40 as an essential turning point, a portal between who we were and who we can become. And what's most fascinating is how his ideas continue to make sense, even today, in a fast-paced world eager for immediate answers. In this video, we will explore why, according to Jung, life only begins at 40. Let's dive into the concepts of individuation, shadow, and the profound invitation that this phase of life makes to us, to finally be whole. So, if you're on this journey, or if you want to understand what's ahead, already leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any content. Here, we talk about soul, transformation, self-knowledge, with depth, but without complication. Now, take a deep breath because what comes next can change the way you see your own story. Most people spend much of their adult lives trying to follow an invisible script, achieving financial stability, building a career, starting a family, buying a house, taking care of their health, maybe traveling a little. This script, in many cases, is followed almost on autopilot, as if we were trying to meet a deadline before time runs out. But there comes a time when, even with everything seemingly in place, a question begins to echo silently inside. What now? Carl Jung called this moment the beginning of the second half of life. And, for him, this phase was not just a linear continuation of the first. It was a transition, almost as if we were called to stop being what the world expected of us, to discover who we really are. Until the age of 40, Jung said, we are too busy building the social self, the one that pleases, adapts, fulfills functions and responds to external expectations. But from the age of 40, something changes. We begin to feel a subtle discomfort, or in some cases, an overwhelming crisis. This feeling is not a coincidence. Jung saw it as a deep calling of the soul. Life, he said, cannot go on indefinitely at the same pace as youth. The energy that drove us before, ambition, achievement, desire for recognition, begins to lose strength. And then emptiness arises. An emptiness that scares, but which also carries the seed of a new possibility, that of becoming whole. This is where the concept of individuation comes in, one of the pillars of Jungian thought. Individuation is the process by which a person becomes himself, unique, complete, not perfect, but whole. And that doesn't happen while we're just trying to fulfill roles. This process requires looking within, confronting our shadows, welcoming our contradictions, and integrating the parts of us that have been overlooked along the way. At 40, many have already experienced losses, frustrations, new beginnings. They have already understood that control is an illusion and that life does not always follow the plan. This accumulation of experiences prepares us, even without us realizing it, for this second birth, the birth of our true self. And that's why Jung said that life only really begins at 40, because that's when we finally have the chance to stop playing a role and start living for real. But this requires courage, because to take this step, we need to abandon the certainties of youth. We must admit that we don't know everything, that we still have a lot to discover, and that this new path may not be understood by everyone around us. After all, what happens when you start to change inside, but the world keeps expecting the same version of you? Many feel alone in this crossing. Others get lost trying to return to their old self, like someone trying to wear a garment that no longer fits. But what Jung proposes is exactly the opposite. He invites you to move forward even without a map. Because the map, at this stage of life, is not outside. It begins to be drawn from within. This journey is not quick or easy, but it's real. And most of all, it's yours. It is the moment when the soul begins to whisper louder than the ego, in which the search for meaning becomes more important than the search for success. It is the beginning of a new narrative, written with more awareness, more presence, and, finally, more truth. And to understand how this transformation happens, and why so many people feel they are lost just when they are closest to finding themselves, we need to talk about the shadow. For Jung, no one becomes whole without first facing what has been repressed, forgotten, or denied throughout life. And that's exactly where one of the most powerful and often misunderstood concepts of Jungian psychology comes in: the shadow. The shadow is everything that, for some reason, we have been taught to hide. They are traits, desires, fears, impulses, and memories that we deem unacceptable. From an early age, we learn what is good and what is bad, what is acceptable and what is shameful. And in an attempt to be loved, included, and valued, we begin to hide parts of ourselves. But these parts do not disappear. They go into the unconscious, and there they become our shadow. But contrary to popular belief, the shadow is not just the bad side of our personality. It also houses our unlived potential, stifled talents, legitimate desires that have been silenced, emotions that never had room to exist. It is a dark territory, yes, but also fertile. And when we reach the middle of life, that shadow begins to knock on the door. It is as if the soul said, "It is time to look at all that you have left behind." This call usually comes through existential crises, unexpected changes, nameless restlessness. We can even try to resist, saying that everything is fine, that it's just a phase, that it will pass. But the more we resist, the more the shadow finds ways to manifest itself, whether in impulsive behaviors or in feelings of emptiness, or in conflicts that seem to come from nowhere. Jung believed that by the time we reach 40, we no longer have the luxury of continuing to ignore the shadow. The soul asks for integration. And to integrate is not to eliminate, but to welcome. It is recognizing that we are contradictory, that we can feel love and anger, compassion and envy, strength and fragility, all at the same time. And that doesn't make us worse. It makes us human. But this process is not comfortable. Looking at the shadow requires humility. It requires a willingness to ask oneself, who have I become to please others? And who did I stop being for fear of rejection? These are questions that poke the ego, that take us out of the role of victim and put us face to face with the responsibility to grow. But at the same time, there's a profound beauty to this dive. Because when you start to bring light to what was hidden, something inside you starts to reorganize itself. The loose pieces of your story begin to make sense. You understand why certain patterns repeat themselves, why certain relationships hurt you, why certain dreams keep coming back, even after years. The shadow, deep down, wants to be seen. She wants to be heard. She wants you to stop hiding from yourself. And when that happens, something powerful begins to emerge: authenticity. It is only by facing the shadow that you begin to live with truth. Because you can't build a meaningful life by pretending to be only half of who you are. And that's where the turning point starts to happen. You stop seeking external approval and start seeking internal coherence. And believe me, this change is liberating. But integrating the shadow is not the end of the journey. It is just one of the most important steps. Because after accepting who you are, comes an even deeper question. Where do you want to go now? And that's where the true purpose of the second half of life comes in: the search for meaning. When we begin to integrate the shadow and free ourselves from the masks we have worn for so long, something essential is revealed: an internal space. A different silence. It's as if, after years of trying to fit into the world, we finally have space to ask ourselves, sincerely, what gives meaning to my life? Jung said that the first half of life is guided by the impulse to adapt to the external world, what he called ego development. The second half is guided by the search for meaning. No longer by goals that can be measured by achievements, status, or numbers, but by something deeper: an alignment with what makes us feel alive inside. This turnaround, however, does not happen magically. Often, it arises after a collapse of meaning, a moment when everything that once seemed to matter loses its luster. Sometimes it comes with the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, the departure of the children from home, an unexpected illness, or simply the realization that life is passing by and you are not really in it. It's hard, but it's also sacred, because it is in these moments of emptiness that something new can be born. What Jung proposes is that this pain is not a mistake. It is the symptom of an awakening soul. The search for meaning is not a philosophical luxury, it is a vital necessity. And there is no single right answer. Finding meaning doesn't mean discovering a grandiose mission or doing something spectacular. Sometimes, it is to rediscover a simple forgotten pleasure, such as painting, writing, listening to music, taking care of the garden, being present with those you love, or simply being without so much demand for the sake of it. Meaning arises when there is coherence between what one feels inside and what one experiences outside. When our actions reflect our truths. And, for Jung, this re-encounter with meaning is what provides the basis for a full life in maturity. Because it is from this that the person can place himself in the world no longer as someone who wants to prove something, but as someone who has something true to offer. This transition is powerful. It is when we stop chasing imposed goals to start creating paths that really make sense to us. And, curiously, it is at this point that many people discover a new vocation, change professions, start projects that previously seemed impossible, or even start to live more lightly, even without changing anything outside. The key is in inner listening. When we stop defining ourselves on the outside and start listening to what pulsates inside, we make room for the soul to express itself. And that's where we find purpose, not as a fixed goal, but as a way of living in tune with what's essential. This purpose does not have to be grand in the eyes of the world. It just needs to be true for you. It can be in serving, creating, caring, teaching, transforming, or simply being a conscious presence in the lives of others. The important thing is that it resonates with who you are, not who you think you should be. Jung believed that this connection with the deep meaning of existence is what brings wholeness. And that's what makes the second half of life not a decline but an opportunity, perhaps the richest of all. But there is an important point in this journey that cannot be ignored: the relationship with time. Because when you realize that life is not infinite, a lot changes. And it is precisely this perception that we will explore next: how the confrontation with finitude can lead us to live with more intensity, more presence, and, finally, more truth. Few things have as much power to awaken us as the consciousness of time. At some point in life, usually around the age of 40 or shortly thereafter, the perception of finitude becomes impossible to ignore. No matter how busy we are, how much we postpone decisions, or how much we try to keep the youth alive at any cost, time, silently, reminds us that it does not stop. And Jung knew that this confrontation with mortality is not a tragedy. In fact, it is an invitation. When we are younger, we tend to live as if we have all the time in the world. We make decisions based on haste, impulse, or the expectation that there will always be another chance. But maturity brings a new look. We realize that time is a non-renewable resource. And this, far from being a reason for anguish, may be what finally frees us to live with more presence. Jung saw this awareness of time as something transformative. It is not about living in fear of death, but about recognizing that it exists, and that precisely for this reason, every choice we make matters. When we realize that we can't embrace everything, we learn to choose more clearly. When we understand that we won't last forever, we begin to ask more seriously, what is really worth it? This change in perspective invites us to get out of autopilot. We stop wasting energy on what is superficial. We have come to value authentic relationships, simple moments, experiences that previously went unnoticed. There is a refinement of the senses, but also of the priorities. Life begins to be measured not by how much we have, but by the quality of what we live. And this does not mean living in a hurry, quite the contrary. It means to live with intention, make every day count, to be truly present in conversations, decisions, affections. When time becomes valuable, life becomes sacred. This is why so many reports of profound transformation happen just after 40, because that is when the value of time is finally understood. In this process, we also start to review old choices. Things that seemed urgent are now no longer so important. And what has been postponed for so long, a personal project, a change of path, a reconciliation, begins to gain new space. Because now, we know that there is no more time to waste living a life that is not really ours. This perception also brings another important change: the way we look at the past. We stop seeing mistakes as failures and start recognizing them as necessary parts of the journey. Time teaches us to have more compassion for who we have been and more responsibility for who we want to be from here. It is at this point that many people feel like simplifying, to let go of excess, to silence the noise, to do less, but with more meaning. It is a natural movement. By understanding that time is limited, we seek experiences that feed the soul and not just the ego. But this new way of living also requires a conscious choice, that of not postponing any longer. Because after integrating the shadow, seeking meaning and facing time with lucidity, a question imposes itself with renewed force. What am I not yet living out of fear, and what do I know, deep down, that is calling me? This is where many people feel the call to something greater. Not in the grandiose sense, but in the intimate sense. A deep alignment between who you are, what you feel, and how you live. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. About the reunion with the true self and the courage to live from the inside out. After looking at the shadow, rescuing meaning, and facing finitude with maturity, something profoundly transformative begins to happen: the reunion with the true self. This term, so central to Jung's psychology, does not refer to the ideal self, that polished, controlled image we try to sustain, but rather to the essence of who we are, before labels, before masks, before fears. The true self is that which pulsates even when the world is silent. It is what is left when everything that is external ceases to define us. It is a silent force that guides us, even when we are lost. And the most curious thing is that it was never absent. It was just covered by layers and layers of expectations, frustrations, social roles, and conditionings that we have accumulated over the years. The journey of individuation proposed by Jung is, in essence, a return to the center of oneself, not as an escape from reality, but as a reconnection with what is genuine. This process does not happen overnight. It happens gradually, in the details, in the silences, in the choices made with more truth. Every time you say no to what empties you and yes to what nourishes you, you get closer to your center. Every time you act in coherence with your soul, even if the world does not understand, you become stronger inside. Rediscovering one's true self is a deeply liberating experience, but it also requires detachment. It is necessary to let go of the need to please, to control, to appear strong all the time. It is necessary to welcome vulnerability as part of wholeness. And this is where many are surprised. Instead of becoming stronger in the traditional sense, they become more whole, more sensitive, more intuitive, more open to life. This reconnection also radically changes the way we relate to each other. We stop looking to others for the validation that we lacked before and start building more authentic bonds. Love, in this new stage, is no longer an attempt to fill a void, but a conscious choice to share who we are. Friendships gain depth, encounters become more meaningful, and mismatches are also taken more lightly, because we understand that each one is in their own time, on their own journey. And this reunion with the self also has a direct impact on the way we place ourselves in the world. We no longer live according to what is expected of us, but in harmony with what we want to express. This can mean changing direction, creating something new, dedicating yourself to something that once seemed small, but now makes perfect sense. The soul, finally, gains a voice. All this, of course, does not make us immune to life's challenges, but it gives us a solid foundation. One axis, an inner place from which we can live with more presence, more wisdom, and more peace. It's as if, after years of going around in circles outside of us, we've finally found our way back home. And when that happens, life changes. Not on the outside, necessarily, but on the inside. The same routine takes on new meanings. The same body, now more lived, is now honored as a temple of experiences. And even time, once feared, is now valued as a gift, because now we know how to use it. This state of alignment with the self is perhaps the greatest gift of maturity. And it is what prepares us for what comes next. A lighter, truer life, more connected to what matters. Because at the end of this journey, we understand that life is not just about finding answers, but to live the questions more consciously. And it is precisely in this spirit that we approach the conclusion, to reflect, with Jung, on what it really means to live with soul. Coming of age, the second half of life, is not the beginning of the end. It is the beginning of a new kind of existence. A way of living that is more whole, more conscious, more true. Carl Jung did not see this moment as decadence, but as the deepest and most significant stage of the human journey. He believed that while youth is marked by the construction of identity and adaptation to the external world, maturity is marked by the return to the center, the integration of the soul, and the reconnection with that which gives meaning to life. It is at this point that we understand, everything we have experienced so far has been necessary. The achievements, the losses, the mistakes, the successes, the pains and the joys. Nothing was in vain. Every step has brought us to this very moment. The moment when we can finally choose to live with more awareness. Integrating the shadow, accepting time, rescuing purpose, and rediscovering the self are not easy tasks, but they are essential steps for those who want to live authentically and deeply. Jung shows us that true happiness is not in avoiding pain, but in finding meaning even in difficult experiences. That freedom is not in doing what we want, but in being true to who we really are. And that maturity is not a phase of loss, but of revelation, an opportunity to live with more presence, more soul, and more truth. Perhaps, for a long time, we have believed that life has a single peak, usually associated with youth, performance, image. But Jung invites us to question this idea. And more than that, it invites us to look with reverence at the second half of life as a new chance. A chance to find yourself again. To reinvent yourself, to free yourself from external expectations and finally listen to what the soul has to say. Because, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how long you've lived. It matters how much you're willing to live with presence going forward. What matters is the courage to look within, to make peace with what has been and to open up to what can still be. It is important to live no longer to correspond, but to express. No longer to accumulate, but to share. No longer to survive, but to flourish. Does life only begin at 40? Maybe so, if we are willing to awaken to it. Because it is at this point that we finally have the chance to live with more awareness, more meaning, and more freedom than ever before. Not because we have all the answers, but because we now know how to ask the right questions. And this, perhaps, is the greatest wisdom of all, to live with a soul. If this content touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel. Here, the journey continues, with reflections that nourish, questions that transform, and ideas that illuminate the path of those who seek to live with more truth. See you in the next video.